It's my pleasure to be on this panel on this topic of emerging challenges in the Indo-Pacific. At the beginning, when I received this invite from Pramod, whom I'm talking today after about 14 or 15 years, last when we had met here at IDSA Delhi, I did indicate to him that I have no expertise on Indo-Pacific. And therefore, allow me to choose a topic which is to my liking, that is trying to profile the importance of the land factor in the Indo-Pacific. Before I come to discussing or spelling out a short argument on this, let us look at the several notions of the Indo-Pacific. While there are a large number of them in place, let me just look at two of these to see as to why the land factor becomes important for all of us. As we look at the Indo-Pacific, we all see that as an emerging area of geostrategic competition. In that we say, we all say that it is characterized by the rise of China, which in a way in the Pacific is questioning a reigning power, that is the United States. While in the Indian Ocean region, it is making inroads over these last few years and decades. In a way, one can also say that there is a raging rivalry between US and China in the Pacific. And there is a kind of a budding rivalry that we can see emerging between India and China in the Indian Ocean region. So consequently, what is happening is that we are seeing that a large number of alignments are falling in place, whether these are bilateral, trilateral, or multilateral. And the ones which have now gained quite a bit of prominence is like the Quad or the AUKUS. In a way, is trying to bring in place a kind of a strategic collaboration with a view to build capacity, a certain amount of interoperability. And some Western experts also say that, can be a certain amount of interchangeability also of roles. And look at building a larger security resilience in the Indo-Pacific. So when we look at this particular notion here, what we see is that the Indo-Pacific is treated as one big geostrategic space, which is expansive. In a way, it is by 8,000 by 8,000 kilometers, a very large number of countries, close to about 3 dozen countries, some 14 to 15 time zones, and a very large number of large militaries are there, and also 5 nuclear weapon states also there in this region. So this notion basically professes that the entire region, the entire space, the whole of Indo-Pacific is one geostrategic space. The other competing notion is that the Indo-Pacific are in fact 2 contiguous oceans. They are completely distinct and different in a sense that they demonstrate very different pathologies in terms of different maritime geographies, in terms of different maritime histories of war and conflict, in terms of different maritime security contexts and agenda on the table. If you were to look at the Pacific in this particular case, we all see that it's a very congested and a contested geography, that it has a long history of wars and conflicts. It has a history of claims and counterclaims. And there is a constant game of chicken at play at the sea, to the extent of drawing lines on the sea and all that, what we talk of. When we look at the Indian Ocean region, it has largely got open geographies, in a sense that there have been no conflicts or contests in place, other than the routine maritime issues that you have there. And in fact, over the last decades, most of the countries in that region have been internally oriented in terms of, looking after their own geographies, possibly dealing with the issues of decolonization over these years. So what I mean to say is that in the second context, these two different oceans look at themselves in different ways. The Pacific carries, in that sense, in terms of a strategic outlook, a more maritime outlook and less continental. But when we look at the Indian Ocean, it is, I would say, more Pacific in that sense. It carries a larger continental context and a relatively less maritime outlook. Now, when we look at these two different notions, and of course, there are several other notions that are in place, what I want to bring out is that these two notions are largely driven by the land factor. When I say land factor, what I mean by that is the landforms as how they come up, as how they exist, either in the Indian Ocean or in the Pacific Ocean. Now, when we talk about landform, we are essentially talking about countries, the shape and size that they take. So you have countries which are peninsular, you have countries which have a deltaic outlook, you have countries which are landlocked, you have countries which have a kind of a coastal outlook. We have islands, large islands, small islands, and island territories, island chains, and all that put together. So if you were to look at the landform in both the oceans, what we find is that there is a subcontinental context and there is a non-subcontinental context. When we look at the subcontinental, whether we look at the subcontinental context or at the non-subcontinental context, which is largely the islands and the island territories, we must remember that the land factor tends to bring in a security orientation which is 360 degrees. In a sense, when we talk about the subcontinental context, it is about land borders, it's about internal security and then maritime security. When we talk about island territories, it is about the maritime approaches to those island territories. Next is the coastal defense of those island territories. And then obviously the internal security of the country per se. So what I mean to say is that the countries where the landform is largely subcontinental have a way of looking at looking at national security priorities, and the countries which are maritime have a different way of looking at the security priorities. So therefore, the land factor is extremely important. Let us take the case of India. In the case of India, we have a large number of land neighbors. We have large land borders. Some of them are even contested or they are active fronts. We have an internal security situation in some of the states, and we also have a maritime context. So therefore, in our context, as a land lover, my outlook would be that, look, you have to basically figure out whether you want a stronger continental outlook or a land outlook or a stronger maritime outlook. In a way, can you afford to be weak on the Himalayas and be strong at the sea, or strong on Himalayas and weak at the sea? So therefore, this entire issue of contested borders, active fronts, festering militancies, and everything else put together gives a continental orientation to a country like India. Well, there can be several other examples like this. So without getting into that, what I want to bring out is that it is for this reason that when we look at the bulk total of the land armies in the whole of Indo-Pacific, of all the militaries put together, approximately 60% of the standing force is basically land militaries or land armies. In a way, in the case of India, about 85% of our armed forces is the land component. When you look at Indonesia, about I think 75% of their total uniformed force is a land component. When you look at Philippines, I think it's about 70%. When you look at Japan, it is about 60%. So what I'm trying to say is that despite the fact that some of these countries have a very high maritime orientation, look at the component of the land armies that they have. They have fairly large land armies vis-a-vis the air forces and the navies. And there's a reason to that. And the reason to that is that people live on land, that the governments act from land, and that wars or conflicts basically range at land. So So the land component has got a very important role to play. Not only that, the other issue is that the land component carries some of the foundational capacities of any armed force. They are organized on scope and scale, which is different than the Air Force and the navies. Their ability to undertake large-scale operations is at a different scale. Their ability to consolidate gains is at a different scale. So what I mean to say is that in this entire business of maritime security, there has to be an able balance, a sound balance between components of the force. To say that the maritime dimension is largely just an air and a naval dimension is, to my mind, would not be a good argument. That there has to be a joint component which has to be at play. And that is one reason, as I mentioned earlier, that there are a large number of countries which carry this subcontinental outlook. Or for them, land borders are extremely important. For them, how they work from the continent down to the maritime space is the way that the maritime security is rooted in continental security. So this is extremely important. So what I was trying to say is that when we look at maritime security, we have to look at the land forms first, at the land factor first, in terms of the standing land armies, what foundational capacities that they have, how possibly they can shape the environment at sea, how can they counter aggression to island territories, are they in a position to undertake large scale operations, can they be helpful to the air and the maritime components in terms of consolidating gains at sea. So this is a purely military perspective, in that sense, what I'm trying to put across to you. So when we look at casting the maritime security agenda, my point is that there is a very important requirement to balance the requirements at sea and at land. Now today, when we're talking about Indo-Pacific, if we try to supplant the context of the Pacific into the Indian Ocean region, my argument is that it should not lead to the overpolarization of the sea. In a sense, that the contest and contestation that is there in the Pacific is not relevant to the Indian Ocean region at this point of time. So therefore, in that context, the maritime dimension weighs in terms of priorities a little lesser. So this helps us to basically make a maritime choices. Now, the maritime choices are all about, protecting your near seas or your far seas, securing the channels or the choke points, strengthening your island territories or strengthening your maritime sovereignty and security. So in the overall context, what I would say is that while for the Pacific Ocean, there is a kind of an oceanic identity that has evolved, that is of competition and contestation, I would say that in the Indian Ocean, that oceanic identity is still evolving. If that oceanic identity is still evolving, then we have to see as to how do we go about tailoring the maritime dimensions of this particular environment. Till such time we do not build coherent maritime context. It is difficult. It will always be difficult for us. It will always be difficult for countries which are with a continental context or a subcontinental context to break away from these contexts and operate in the maritime domain. Now, so that was my basic argument, that land plays a very important role in the shaping of the maritime context, in the shaping of the maritime security agenda, in terms of balancing the requirements at sea and land, as I said earlier, in terms of as to how does a country decide as to what kind of a money is to be put into men, machines, and materials that make the militaries. Okay, has it to be for the land component or for the air component or for the maritime components? In a sense, of course, the broad spectrum of operations will have to be joined at sea as well. and therefore the right proportions have to be worked out in terms of constitution of constituting military forces on the ground. Now, having made that short argument, and since we're talking about emerging challenges at sea, I just want to say that when we look at the maritime dimension, it is extremely expansive in terms of extending right from piracy down to blue crimes. So therefore, if you were to really kind of categorize these big challenges that we have, I can put them at two levels. One, of course, are the structural challenges in terms of there are far too many actors at play at sea. So therefore, how do we break these silos? How do we de-silos these different actors on ground at sea and put them together? I think this is a big structural challenge that we have at sea. The other is a functional challenge on which I have a little understanding, but my point is that as an outsider, you always see repeated breakdown of the maritime rules of sea. Now, if they continue to be like this, so therefore, how do you bring order at sea is a structural challenge for us. So in a way, it is about how does the state articulates its policy in terms of controlling various actors at sea, and how do you look at the different rules of the sea? At a functional level, I think it is more of a chain of control issue. It's about information sharing. Is there a requirement to work beyond information sharing in terms of information fusion and all that? What is the outlook towards securing of island territories or securing of coastlines? What are the different ways of securing commerce? How do you secure infrastructure? But purely putting it from, if I were to bring it down to just about 3 or 4 big challenges that we would see at sea in times to come, I think first would be cybersecurity at sea. As the dependency on the sea increases over time, you have more traffic and therefore more vulnerability at sea. Your navigation systems and everything put together will become extremely important. Second is how do we take care of the critical infrastructure that is day by day going at sea? And the third, my sense is that as the climatic conditions get bad over time, the weather conditions get difficult. So management of traffic at sea and all that becomes extremely difficult. So the broader point, as I said earlier, was to see that when we look at Indo-Pacific, what could be a coherent maritime context? Is it one, or is it split into 2 different oceans? 2, that how much does the landform or the land factor influence the behavior of the states within this maritime space? 3, that from a military perspective, what kind of jointmanship is required at sea? That simply calling it as an air and a maritime dimension might not be enough. That there is a requirement to kind of take into account the land components also in the overall in kind of figuring out the security priorities of the state. So now also what is important is that the countries that carry a very high maritime aspiration, how do they break away from the continental context is also a question. How would that happen? Is it doable or it is not doable in the time frames that we look at? Or is that a culture that would evolve over time and therefore you present that? So that's all I have. Thanks.